I'm probably more nervous now than I was facing the Klan down there, so just bear with me. So as you heard before, the August 12th protest in Charlottesville, Virginia was my first real experience in direct action or any real large-scale protest of any kind. I went to a May Day protest a couple years ago, but that's about it. So I went down to Virginia with comrades from Workers' World, Black Lives Matter, NYC Shut It Down, as something of an outsider. Activism has always held sort of an attraction for me, but I work and go to school full time, so it's always seems sort of a daunting prospect. But I had the sense that this was going to be an historic moment, and I really didn't want to miss it. So basically, my idea of activism, it really changed down there. It really showed the importance of confronting fascism wherever it rears its head. And it doesn't understand anything but force and action. In solidarity, whether it's anarchist, whether it's communist, whether it's socialist, whether it's social democrat. And there are probably some liberals in the group down there. So, a little bit. So I said on here, it sort of made me realize that just sitting on the sidelines is suicidal. There are really no impartial observers when fascists take to the streets so brazenly, with no masks, with no shame. They marched in there, heads held high, proud of their disgusting Nordic fucking bullshit. I was so angry down there. It was ridiculous. I've never been so angry before. I've considered myself a communist intellectual for a long time. I've read Capital. I've read some Trotsky. I read his theory on fascism, and it sort of applied down there. Trotsky thought that fascists were human dust. And I saw a lot of human dust in that park. I saw a lot of nobodies. I saw a lot of petty bourgeois, sad, worthless people. And I saw on our side, I saw black people, I saw women, I saw peoples of color. I saw everyone on our side. And their side all looked the same. And I think that said a lot. And I also want to make something else clear. Communists have always been on the front lines to combat racism throughout history. Whether it was in Scottsboro, South Carolina, or the plantation, like sharecropping in the South, the communists were very, very active there. So I have read a lot about the movement, but nothing really prepared me for what I experienced down there. It's one thing to see these symbols and people in books and black and white photos. It's quite another to see them in person. So we arrived to Charlottesville the day of the protest, and the night before we saw the images of the Torchlight Rally, so I think that sort of set the tone. It was blatant Nazi imagery. And they were chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." They were giving the salute. I mean, it was blatantly fascist. It was blatantly Nazi. They had no shame. So when I saw that, I sort of had an idea of what we were going to face. So the first thing that struck me when I went to Charlottesville was how hot and humid it was. The South is really fucking hot. And it's really fucking humid. And it was that sort of humidity that you kind of realize like a storm is in the air. So there was a sense of tension in the air that you could just feel. So when we were in the parking lot, sort of everyone was gathering from our separate cars. Our group, we noticed two sort of guys in vests and carrying sidearms, virtually indistinguishable from police officers. But they were members of the right-wing militia, just sort of like brazenly loitering on the sidewalk, standing guard or whatever they thought they were doing. This would prove to be a common sight throughout the day. So once everyone was accounted for, we had our banners, we had our signs, we made our way towards the park. And as we were walking down the street, we walked by the Charlottesville police station. And I saw about a dozen or so police officers standing by, just watching. And based on footage I saw after we left, just minutes before we arrived, a large contingent of Nazis armed with shields and clubs arrived the same route that we did. And there was no, just based on the cops' body language, there was no sense that we were going into any sort of danger. Like we were just walking, and they were like, everything's fine. And so we're like, everything's fine. Just like a bunch of bearded Klansmen walking down the street, and I guess it's a normal sight for them.
That's right. Yeah. They are the Klansmen.
So, let's see. So we got to the park, and we unfurled our banner, and it was a pretty cool moment. We were marching in our formation, and everyone was arriving. The Nazis were arriving. The left was arriving from the same route. So I assumed a lot of people thought that our contingent was another brigade of Nazis, but they saw our banner and immediately started cheering, and the fists were raised, and it was a really special moment. I felt such solidarity with the crowd there. So we walked by the police station, and the Charlottesville Police Department made a conscious choice to hand over the streets of their city to these Nazi thugs. They stood by and did nothing. If you saw these men in real life, like my comrades and I did, they were intimidating. Yeah. Riot shields, helmets, masks, metal pipes. It was quite an array of weaponry against us, and I saw nothing comparable on our side. Absolutely nothing. So when we got to the park, the counter-protesters, I don't like that term counter-protesters. I think it sort of minimizes the communist and socialist contingent in the groups. It was more than a counter-protest. It was a display of solidarity against white supremacy and racism. So the leftist protesters, which I'll refer to them as from now on, were arrayed around the park. And you had right-wing militia ostensibly standing guard between the two sides. But they were really protecting the Nazis in the park. So you had us in the street, the militia on the sidewalk, and you could see the Nazis in the park. You couldn't see them, but you could see their flags, and you could see Robert E. Lee standing guard over his new regiment of shitheads. So his statue was towering over. You could see Nordic symbols. You could see Confederate flags bobbing underneath him. And it looked like the park was boiling from all these flags being raised up. And so I took a look around. I was trying to be observant. And I saw many communist flags, IWW flags, hammer and sickles, amid our contingent. So the largest contingents facing down the Nazis were communists, were socialists, were anarchists, no matter what the media would like to say. We were on the front lines. It was an experience, and it really shows the anti-racist and anti-white supremacy nature of our movement. So basically, as my fellow comrade said, shit began basically popping off right when we got there. And it started to get out of hand when you had more Nazis coming down the street. So you had Nazis on this side and Nazis on this side. And so we were kind of surrounded on both sides, really. And you had Nazis coming in behind us in the park. No police. No police whatsoever. Nothing protecting the two groups. Nothing. There was like a random police car parked in the middle of the intersection. But it did more to congest the atmosphere than to protect anyone. Yeah, it was just an abandoned car. They just, I guess, like ditched it or something. So as more Nazis started to get into the park, I immediately noticed water bottles being flung through the air. And that's when it really started to get out of hand, because it wasn't just water bottles. After a few minutes, it was rocks. And at one point, I saw a Nazi emerge from this phalanx of shields and toss a brick. He threw a brick directly at the head of a leftist protester at the bottom of the stairs. And luckily, the protester was able to dodge out of the way. Shortly thereafter, you could smell mace in the air. I've never experienced mace before, and it stings and it makes you cough. And so you're sort of doubled over coughing, and you feel doubly vulnerable to the shit flying at you. So every few minutes you could see a leftist protester coming back from the front line, either with blood streaming down their face, or their face swollen and purple from being maced at point blank range. And as they were pummeling us with smoke bombs and mace, they were screaming disgusting, racist, and anti-Semitic chants over the microphone, which I assumed was a tactic to antagonize especially the people of color in the group. So we had smoke bombs flying at us, and one actually hit a tent right next to me, and I saw someone pick it up and throw it back, which was really incredible. And so I guess I'm going to try to wrap it up. But it's important to emphasize how well equipped they were. With the exception of a few canvas banners, our side had zero protection. The Nazis came equipped with body armor, masks, and helmets, and they were ready for all-out war. They had a literal phalanx of shields on the top of the stairs, protecting them from the projectiles. We had absolutely nothing. So I felt a little vulnerable, especially with my flimsy cardboard pole. But I felt a real sense of power being in a group, and especially a group that was keeping its cool, and retreating but moving back. And I'm so impressed with the leadership of the protest that we were able to stay together as a cohesive unit. And I guess my final thought is that any of us could have been in front of that car. We were all on the same side. So Heather Heyer really, it could have been any of us. So all of us really were really Heather Heyer that day. And the car was a logical conclusion from what we saw at the park. It didn't surprise me 1 ounce what they were capable of and what I saw. So they may feel emboldened. They may even have the presidency. But I think a real movement is starting to form around in this country and around the world. And it's a movement led by communists, by socialists, by revolutionaries. And I think we proved in Charlottesville that we're ready to fight, and that we won't run. And I've been thinking a lot about Heather Heyer recently, and it makes me quite emotional. So there's a song. It's about Joe Hill, and there's a lyric that I really like from it. It's and standing there as big as life and smiling in his eyes, Joe says, what they forgot to kill went on to organize. So just I feel so deeply for Heather Heyer's family and all the comrades in the various contingents that were harmed in the vicious attack, and all of the people brutally mauled and beaten by these thugs, by these actual Nazi thugs. But I think we're ready. I think our side, I think we proved that we can stand up, that we won't cut and run. We'll always be in the front lines. So I saw a lot of evil and I saw a lot of hate, but I saw a lot of solidarity. So it makes me hopeful in a way. I see the other side and I see what they're capable of, but I know what we're capable of. And we're on. I sort of hate that it's sort of a deterministic thing, but I really believe that we're on the right side of history. And that I like. There's a and I want to end with a Trotsky quote. After the October Revolution, the Mensheviks were walking out of the hall, and he says, "Out with you to the dustbin of history." So I want to see all these fascists and neo-Nazis consigned to the dustbin of history, and I think our movement is capable of doing it. So that's about all I have. Thank you so much.